Japanese jets of World War II? What do you mean? They didn't have any, did they? Actually, it's not as clear-cut as you might think. What do we even consider a proper jet aircraft? For instance, the revolutionary German Me.163 Komet was actually rocket-powered and not a jet, while the P-51 Mustang or the Soviet LaGG-3 actually had some features of a jet aircraft. Here's what we're talking about. Japanese engineers were as aware of the principles of jet propulsion as their colleagues overseas. For instance, when they acquired a Soviet LaGG-3 in 1939, they were completely unfazed by the design of the air intake based on the Yefremov turboreactor. Air flowing into the intake was compressed, then heated by a radiator, after which the hot, pressurized air exited through the exhaust, producing a bit of additional thrust. Likewise, Japanese engineers simply noted the existence of a similar system on the captured P-51C, which made use of the Meredith effect. In fact, Japanese design bureaus and aviation research centers were actively looking into the possibility of creating a jet aircraft since the second half of the 1930s. Big aircraft manufacturers made their forays into the field but were very mindful of the conservative stance of the military elite, while small independent companies were much more open to all sorts of experimentation. For instance, we know about katsudori, a ramjet concept developed by Kayaba. The fighter shared quite a few similarities with the Me-163, but featured small vertical stabilizers on the tips of its main planes instead of a conventional stabilizer at the rear of the aircraft. Furthermore, while the Komet was rocket-powered, Japanese engineers planned to equip their design with an actual ramjet propulsion system. The plane would still use rocket pods for takeoff and initial acceleration, but then it was jet time. Design work on the katsudori progressed into 1944, but then it was abandoned in favor of the Ki-200, which was basically the Japanese Komet. How is it possible then that when it mattered the most, Japan was left without a single jet fighter, while their closest ally, Germany, was building hundreds of them? There are two main reasons for that, and the first one is a matter of perspective. Now, in the 21st century, the advantages of a jet engine over a propeller engine are rather obvious, but in the first half of the 1940s, the situation was rather different. The first turbines were pretty hard to manufacture, use, and maintain. By many metrics, they were simply worse than their predecessors. Not to mention that war is often a matter of numbers. Why would you invest in building a single unproven jet fighter when you could spend the same time and resources to build 10 piston-engined ones? If you look at it like that, the miracle of the early adoption of a new type of engine in Germany doesn't seem like a breakthrough or a miracle at all. It seems more like a reckless, last-ditch effort to do something about the overwhelming air supremacy of the Allies. Another thing about Japan at the time is that it had to deal with industrial backwardness in metallurgy, mechanical engineering, and radio electronics. And that's without even mentioning the opposition by the staunch conservatives in the military. Eventually, even those conservatives agreed to accelerate efforts to produce a domestic jet fighter, but that happened only in 1943 when they started losing in the Pacific. At the same time, it took Japan a lot of effort to get the technical documentation for the Me-163 and its rocket engine, as well as the blueprints for the first German turbojets that they could use to make their own designs. It was very easy for the Japanese to reverse engineer the airframe of the Komet, but the rocket engine proved to be more of a challenge. The work on the Ki-200 interceptor was slow due to a whole range of insurmountable technical difficulties. The only time the prototype took to the skies right before the end of the war ended in tragedy. There was an engine malfunction at low altitude and the plane crashed, condemning the pilot to death. Engineers working on the Japanese turbojet weren't doing any better. After acquiring the blueprints for the Messerschmitt Me-262, experts at Nakajima decided to do it their way and try to solve problems of the aircraft instead of just blindly copying the original. They went with straight wings, ditching the slight sweepback of the Me-262, and replaced slotted flaps with more advanced split flaps. Furthermore, the airframe of the Japanese version was noticeably smaller. It could have become an excellent early jet, but by the time the engines were ready, the war was almost over. The Kika took to the air only in mid-1945 when it was simply too late. It couldn't change anything. During its second flight, aimed at testing rocket-assisted takeoff units, the aircraft crashed, and that was it for Japan's first jet aircraft. Nevertheless, while they were waiting for turbojets to arrive, Japanese engineers managed to create several brilliant planes. Take the J-7W Shinden, for example, with its amazing canard design. The plan was to outfit the first variants with radial engines in a pusher configuration and replace them with turbojets once they became available. Then there was the R2Y Keiyun Kai. Its prototype was equipped with piston engines, but its production variant was also to receive turbojets. One last thing to mention is that after the war, American specialists discovered a very interesting high-speed, high-altitude interceptor prototype known as the Ki-83. The results of its flight testing were shocking, to say the least. When it came to its acceleration capabilities, max speed and level flight, and climb rate, the Japanese plane outperformed both the late Lightning and the brand-new Grumman F-7F. The reason for this surprising performance only became evident after careful examination. As it turned out, exhaust gases were led from the turbocharger turbine to the end of the engine nacelle and exited through wastegates positioned at the end of the nacelle, providing something akin to jet thrust. And so much thrust, in fact, that in some modes it contributed up to an additional 50 kilometers an hour. In other words, when it came to building jets, Japanese engineers didn't lack skills or expertise. What they didn't have was enough time to turn their vision into a reality.